we're going to be diving deep into this amazing conversation around how do you actually manage remote teams effectively, which is such a hot topic for everyone right now. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a little introduction of myself, our team here at Invisible Edge. We're going to go through some of our best practices and strategies on how to actually manage your teams more effectively so you can actually have more connection, more engagement, and more collaboration. We'll also have plenty of time for Q&A. So you'll have the chat box available. We'll be checking that throughout the webinar. So please ask any of your questions live, and we're happy to get to those. We'll also be doing some engagement and some Q&A just to get a sense of the pulse of what are some of your challenges you're facing right now? What are some of the opportunities as well? Okay, so let's dive in. So, welcome to our webinar on managing remote teams effectively. I'm Rick Snyder. I am the CEO of Invisible Edge and the author of Decisive Intuition. And I was just thinking about this. This is such a timely moment where we're having to use our intuition as people leaders and as managers than ever before, where we have to literally tune in and adapt to the changing needs every hour sometimes, or every week, or every day. There's so much happening where, there's different policy changes, there's different company-wide changes that are happening, statewide policies. So we have to be paying attention on so many levels and really be able to get that information to our people and make split-second decisions. So there's never been a more useful time than this skill of developing our intuitive intelligence right now in this capacity. Before we go any further, I want to introduce some amazing members of our team. And let's start with you, Slade. I'd love to introduce you if you want to go ahead and take it out.
Thanks, Rick. And it's such a joy to be here with all of you during this time and to talk about this topic. It's always important, but even now more so than ever. And, I've spent my career managing remotely, just based on the different roles that I've had, both in IT recruiting, running sort of international recruiting teams, and also in the business coaching arena where I managed a international group of 100 business coaches. So I'm really used to how to impact people from a distance. And so I've put a lot of thought into it and learned a lot about myself in that. So I look forward to sharing my experience with you all. I live in Ashland, Oregon with my wife and child and dog. And good to be here. I'll turn it over to you, Denise.
Yeah, Denise will be more in the background today, just helping out with logistics, but she's a critical part of our team. And so thank you, Denise, for being here. And how about you, Susan? Do you want to go next?
There we go. Yes, I'm happy to. I've been working with Rick and the rest of the team for a couple of years now. I am kind of one of the prime movers behind Intuition University, helping to create the courses and get them all online. And I know Rick will be talking about that a little bit later. Today I'll be talking about technology. It's a tool that I think we all use all the time, but I think there's also some intentional ways that we can use technology when managing teams remotely, and you're losing that in-person or face-to-face contact. So I will be talking about that a little later in the webinar. And now I will turn it over to Linda.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm Linda Newlin, and I have been working remotely myself for 30 years this year, I realize. And so I was one of the pioneers in leaving the bricks and mortar and going home to have control over my time, which is hilarious. We'll talk about that. But I am the author of a book that's just come out called WFH, Working from Home. It's a thrival guide to help everyone lead through these challenging times. And I'm thrilled to be with you today. I would say, my passion has always been around removing the suffering of others. And I think right now we're seeing the most suffering I've seen right from every aspect, emotionally and physically, and safety issues. And so to be leading a team right now is so much more difficult, challenging, hard, and my hope is that today you will find some both self-resilience in our call and also some tips and tools that you can use to really support your teams and your family and those that you are sheltered with at this time. So thrilled to be with you all. And I live in Boulder, Colorado, and we're having rainy snow right now. Yesterday it was 68, and we're having rainy snow. So I'm hoping it's freezing the virus everywhere.
Thank you so much, all of you. So let's dive in. And so as Linda just said, if you think about it, we've been going remote. It's been an experiment for about 30 years now or so that we've actually had the technology to do that, where we can send employees or contractors working from home. And so we've been dealing with a lot of challenges around that, whether it is back in the day, it was more, telecommunications and what have you, finally the internet and going on the web and being able to work remotely that way. Now with our mobile phones and being on the go and traveling around the world, it's really becoming more of a standard thing. But yet it's been an experiment of how can we do this and still run our business. And then, of course, now there's a bigger curveball than we've ever experienced with this global pandemic. And I like looking at this image of the planet right now because it reminds me that we're really all in this together. We're really having to navigate the unknown and uncertainty together in a whole new way. And we're having to figure it out on the fly. And, we've been talking to leaders, CEOs, managers from corporate startups all over the planet, and everyone is having to figure this out right now. And so that's one of the biggest things when you think about how do I all of a sudden have to shift my whole team remotely? What systems are missing that are now being exposed and revealed? What are ways we actually need to double down on our communication and have even more consistent and proactive touch points of what's really going on with my team and get more of a felt sense, because we have a whole new challenge that we didn't anticipate. And so this is a whole nother level of stress, along with the adversity and the opportunity to rise to that challenge. And as human beings are so innovative, often when they're really facing crises, because we have to be. This is where our backs are against the wall, and this is where that entrepreneurial spirit shows up. And we have to figure out those ways to get creative, to try new things fast, and to find our way to build even more collaboration and connection, which is really what this whole hour is about, is how do we actually do that? And so this is one of my favorite images that comes from psychology. I think a lot of you know this already. Some of you, this might be new. But this is something that's really important when you think about what is our whole global community going through right now? What are your employees and your staff going through right now? And here's the quick synopsis is when we have a crisis, right away we drop down to, am I okay? Are my physical needs met? We come right back to water, food, and if Maslow were to redo this chart, toilet paper might be the first one down here. Because apparently that's one of our first needs we're looking for, right? Is toilet paper. But you think about that's exactly what we're seeing around the world. Right away we go back to, what do I need to shore up my supplies? How do I make sure I'm safe and my family's safe? And then once we have our physiological needs met, and you're starting to see that now a little bit more. There's a little more relief in the space in some countries. Other countries are still very much going through this right now. There's also safety needs. So do I have employment? Do I have regular paycheck coming through still? Do I have the resources I need? Am I healthy? Do I have access to a hospital right now if I need to? How's my properties? A sense of safety and security. And how I also want you to think about this is also in your company culture. Is how, as a leader, as a people leader, are you helping make sure your whole team is getting their physiological needs met, and you're at least checking in on that and making sure they're okay, but you're also giving them that assurance that their psychological safety is met. And when your team is remote, this is even more important than ever. And the more, by the way, that you've been doing this work this whole time, your whole team is going to bounce back faster and be more resilient if they already have more foundation as a team, as a company, that you've already been paying attention to their safety needs and needs around feeling comfortable and they actually belong, which is the next rung here on the ladder. Does my team actually feel like they belong? Do they feel included? Are they part of the community? Is there a sense of connection? And so this is really where most of our work's going to be right now as people leaders, as people are remote, and a lot of people are going to be reacting to a crisis in completely different ways. Some people actually work better in a crisis, and they actually step up and they are more resilient in times of need like that. Other people actually have a much more difficult time in a crisis, and they become unwound and maybe just feeling dysregulated in themselves. And so this is why it's also so important, if you're a people leader, to be able to tune in individually to everybody on your team. There's no one size fits all. And so how do I have enough space and compassion in listening for everyone on my team or in my department, in my whole business unit? You know, what's the overall sense that I'm getting? And then also individually, when I check in with people, what can we do as a leadership team and as a management team to build more connection and belonging right now, to build more sense of psychological safety? Do we need to allocate resources if one of our staff members is having a really difficult time? A lot of companies I know are starting to give 2 weeks of paid time off during this crisis. And so there's a lot of different ways that we can look at giving people that sense of safety and continuity. And once they have that, it's going to be really a much more quick springboard to get to that sense of self-esteem, that sense of strength and freedom. That's this next rung here, as well as then how do you get to your full potential, which is the top of the ladder. And once again, any crisis will take us back down to, am I okay? But then how do we spring back is to the degree that your leadership team is providing a sense of connection, a sense of psychological safety, and giving people that sense of autonomy and respect along the way. And so one of the interesting things that we're hearing a lot, of course, is the term social distancing. And I just want to reframe that for you, that what if it's actually not social distancing? What if it's actually physical distancing that we're practicing? We're really just practicing the sense of 2 meters or 6 feet away from each other. But this is actually the time to double down on our social connection. So it's not about social distancing. We actually need to be more social right now. How can you as a manager communicate more frequently about important information that's relevant to them, to your team? How can you communicate more on a human level also, and just have a real check-in to see how they're doing? And so just because you're physically distanced doesn't mean you should be socially distanced. How can you actually double down on that human component? And so this is the big challenge when we're facing what's called VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I can't ever remember a time of more VUCA in a global context where everyone is impacted, like we said before. And so perhaps you've never worked from home yourself. You could be, I'm talking to some executives that have never worked from home their whole career, and they're in charge of 3,000 employees. So imagine you going through that along with trying to also lead your team through that. Let's just be honest. This is new territory. We've never been in this situation. And so we're going to be going through some of the resources about how do you actually operate under a crisis and really build these needs sooner than later. And so before we go to Linda's piece, I just want to ask you this question. I'd love you to enter in the chat box. I want to ask you first, what's actually most challenging in managing your team remotely right now? So take a moment to enter your answer in the chat box. What's most challenging right now as far as managing your team remotely? Take a moment to think about that. I'd love to hear your response. Okay, let's see what we got here. Yeah, so Tom, thank you for sharing. Wondering how productive they really are. This is a very common question that we're seeing a lot of. We're going to get to that, right? Because they're remote. You don't know, are they just playing Fortnite all day? Are they playing video games? Are they really working? This is one of the big concerns and questions a lot of people have. Hans Peter, good to see you here too. Getting the team to connect independent of me. Interesting. So in other words, how do I get them to take initiative with each other and take leadership maybe on certain projects that don't have to involve me every time? It's a really good question. Rahul says, actually, not much challenge. We're kind of used to it. He also says trust, empowerment, and support are really some of the, are those some of the challenges, Rahul, or those are some of the ingredients that you're already used to? Cheng Yin says reading their nonverbal language. Yeah, that's really hard, right? So imagine it's hard enough sometimes in in the office when John says he's fine, but you feel like he's not. Imagine when someone's remote. It's much more difficult to read out micro expressions and get a sense of body language. Even if you don't, what if you don't have video? It's even more difficult. And Jay says actually dialing in on work in conversations. So helping with more attitude, address challenges. All the conversations are dominated by COVID, but how can you also get to some of the other pieces? Because if you only talk about COVID, you're only going to add more stress. I think that's a good point. Is how do we bring out other? We're going to talk about that too today. How do we bring in other parts of the conversation? Okay, and then last question I want to ask you is, what's the opportunity for managing them remotely? So we talked about the challenge. What's actually the opportunity right now? Now that your team's gone remote, what do you see as a new opportunity that's starting to show up for you that maybe you didn't see before? Maybe certain systems or certain relationships are being revealed, or how certain people are stepping up are being revealed that you wouldn't have known if you were just doing the same old by the water cooler or the usual routines in the office. So Paul says, noticing gaps that get filled by physical presence. Yep, that's a great point. And Paul, I'm sure you're already noting more specifically what are those exact gaps, but that's right. You're going to start to see those. Tom says, this could change our entire paradigm. I'm curious how you mean that, Tom. One thing that comes to mind for me is I hear some people saying, I don't think I need my office. That's a different paradigm. Maybe that was unnecessary. You know, maybe we're actually more effective in some ways remote, and maybe we can cut some costs. So I know a lot of people are actually thinking about that these days. And Tom agrees. He says, is an office required? Exactly. So these kind of questions are really going to be coming up for people in the coming time. Okay. Keep sharing. We're going to keep bringing some of these threads in here, but I want to introduce Linda next as we keep moving forward here. We have so many great pieces here. She's going to really be now talking about the heart of communication as a leader and how do you have a coaching mindset. So take it away, Linda.
So thank you all for your comments in the chat. As you all have started to say, there's so many advantages when we look at when we're isolated and we're home working. There's some people who work better at home because there's no distractions. They don't have people coming in and out. So you will find that some people will find this incredibly enhancing to their effectiveness at work. Other people that are more extroverted may find that they're working longer hours, but they're less effective. So helping them to look at and become curious and maybe tracking and noticing for themselves what hours are they more productive during their day, how many of your staff are dealing with kids at home with the fact that they have to homeschool them right now, which is the other piece as a leader is really for you to recognize that in the absence of information, our brain is programmed to be negative. So we don't make up positive things if we're not hearing anything. And if you're not asking, they may not tell you. So right now, having a coaching mindset, bringing your emotional intelligence, those two pieces are going to be critically important. So as communication is, right, a good coach asks powerful questions and listens. Those are the two major elements. And so as a leader, getting really clear about how are you asking the questions and what kinds of questions are you asking to get to the heart of what are the needs that are going on for each of the people that you're connected with? What really is their reality so that you can have a window into the space, into where they're having to work? Do they have 3 kids at home that they have to interrupt their work and go get them set up online for a class? Or do you have people who are having the luxury of working at home alone and they're introverted and they're technically oriented and they're thriving and, you know, cranking out a ton of work, right? So this is going to be a very interesting time. But as you think about what can you do, what are the subtle distinctions, the strengths that you have that you can amp those up right now, I would say one of the key ones is around how we get people to be more productive. There's research that shows, right, the 5 elements of our emotional intelligence. The final one is your general mood. So what are you doing personally in your self-care to build your mood up? So whether that's taking a media fast, not checking COVID numbers every morning before you get on to talk with your team, whether it's finding some way to have fun, engaging resilience practices, one of your biggest assignments as a leader is to improve your mood so that as your mood lifts, your staff, even remotely, are going to be picking that up on the phone or in the video. And when they sense that you're feeling positive energy, their productivity is going to go up. Some of the research shows as much as 27 to 35% of people's productivity is impacted by their boss's mood. So I think these are some of the statistics we've had around for 30 years that I'm pulling out of the archives and saying, oh, that's right. We got to get back to basics, the high impact basics of how we communicate, what are we communicating, how often are we communicating, and not assume that one way is going to work right for everyone right now. And given how much they're dealing with, it's critically important that when you ask the questions, what's really going on, that in your listening, I think the pivot and the kind of game-changing skill there is that you don't listen and think about what you're going to respond to what they're saying. You listen and keep listening more deeply with a curiosity to learn something you don't know each time you speak to them, because things change every day right now for people. Both their moods can change by the hour, given whether they've gotten news about a family member or they've gotten new COVID numbers that are freaking them out, or they have to go to the grocery store and they're worried about bringing it home to their elderly parent. We don't know. So I think communication is going to be the key, both how you're communicating what's inside of you, both verbally and non-verbally, as well as making sure that you are checking in with them on a regular basis. Now, some people, this is one of the other things we were talking about as a team is, you know, having daily check-ins seems really critical right now. And I encourage you to check it out with the people that are on your specific team. For some people, that can feel micromanaging. For some people, they perceive it negatively. So really, again, adjusting per the individual and checking in with them regularly to see what they need that day or that week. And then when we get to, you know, how can we bring positivity to our communication? I would say that people are getting super creative about how to communicate as a team. I'm sure many of you have seen these floating around, but as you think about your industry, the people on your team, you know, some are having bring your pets to a team meeting call and introducing people to their kids and giving a home tour of where their office is so people have a sense of where they are. Another communication strategy, one of my leaders I'm coaching has a picture that he sent to everyone for them to put as a screensaver or somewhere so that when they're having meetings, if there's a Zoom problem or they need to have a telephone conversation instead, that they can imagine the person's face. And so they did like some funny, you know, costume photos and anything to bring levity and joy to the experience. Some teams are doing dance-offs, you know, playing dance music at the beginning of their calls to get everybody's energy up. I personally think that for myself, one of my greatest resources I have of trying to bring more energy and positivity is I stand. Like right now I'm standing. I've been at a standing desk for years, but it's one of the things that I think directly impacts the way that you communicate when you're supporting a team. And so I think there's such value when we're remotely and doing this virtually to create as much of the environment that you would be in. So if you were having a team meeting, you would be standing in a room doing a presentation. most likely, or you would be all gathered around a big table. So I think that as a leader, it's super important to encourage your people to be up working on their feet, whether that's at a kitchen counter or just standing up for meetings, to shift the energy and bring people some more aliveness. I think that's, and I've been talking rapidly. I know my communication right now, I can feel my both excitement as well as my own dynamic that can happen right now. I think that what does happen, one of the dangers in moments like this is that we communicate too much with the need of wanting to connect. And so it's really that feeling into it, which is what the intuitive piece of it is, really checking in below your neck to kind of sense in your gut, what do these people need from me? And if they're not saying it, it doesn't mean you might not be intuiting something. So if you sort of are listening to someone describe what they need, but your body is telling you something different, don't be afraid. Be courageous in your communication and say, you know, gee, Bob, I'm getting a sense that something else is going on. I just want you to know we're all dealing with a lot right now. How can I support you? Is this something you feel like you can be transparent with me? I think that this is an opportunity. I mean, in this big experiment that we are in, I feel like the opportunity for leaders to step up in a way that is remarkable and game-changing. And as someone said in the chat, I briefly saw that true leaders rise in wartime, and we're in a war zone, as close as any of us that haven't served active duty will ever be in. And it's elongating. And so it's a day by day thing. And I feel like communication strategies need to be in our mind as a daily thing of what needs to happen next, which is another aspect of intuitive intelligence, is that we feel into what needs to happen next and trust in the silence of what you're feeling and sensing. I would trust your gut more than anything right now. And so we have lots and lots of skills and tools and tips that all of us can provide you, but I want to stop now and open it up for any questions that you have or any suggestions that you could offer to the rest of us on the call, things that are really working for your team or for yourself around how you're listening and asking powerful questions to support your team.
So if you do have any great strategies, feel free to enter them in the chat box so we can all learn from you as well and share that. Got a couple coming in.
Yeah, daily calls, summaries of the previous day and coming to a call with one new interesting fact. That's great, Ro. Yeah, it's super helpful to give our brains something to chew on other than what is going on in the world right now. It's a great idea. I'm sure many of you, let's see, ask and resist the temptation to reply. Yeah, or relate it to your own experience. Yep, staying in the silence and telling me more. Yeah. So Jay, that's a form of listening. I like to call it channel 2 listening. So when we're on channel 1, our brain is thinking about what we're going to say next. We're wanting to solve their problem. We're thinking about how we can fix it for them. We're thinking about how it relates to ourselves. When we're on channel 2 listening, it's like a different frequency. We are listening for what they're not saying. We're listening to learn something we don't know. And we are presencing and letting silence do the heavy lifting, as I call it. Because in the silence, I'm sure one thing you likely experience, I'm guessing, is that they will sometimes continue to share because you've left silence. Another thing that I love to do, it's one of my tools in my book, is I call it vitamin V, for validation. And that when we hear someone share something and we just validate, oh gosh, that's really tough. It's tough to have kids at home homeschooling. And then you're silent and let it land. And it's like an antidote to stress And it also shifts the person out of the negative mind space and into possibility. So thank you for that, Jay. That's a great lead into that tip. More regular, shorter meetings. Great. Hans-Peter does that. Don't feel like you have to have all the answers, and they sometimes just need to hear your voice. Great. Yeah, and more mystery is more scary. That's one of the things that is fascinating about neuroscience. They know that our brains by nature are survival oriented, and that means that they're naturally programmed to look for the negative, what's wrong, what's missing. So in the absence of information, our human brain does not make up anything positive. So if they don't hear anything from you or their team members, they will likely go into a negative mind space, feeling distrustful, wondering if somebody's talking behind their back, wondering if their secret got out that they didn't work 8 hours yesterday, or wondering if they're being tracked, if they take a break and have a nap, or right? So I think that's something for us to understand and have compassion for, and recognize that the absence of information, they're not going to make up good stuff. Lovely, Chang. Assume good intentions, don't jump to conclusions. Excellent.
Great.
Oh, I love that, Rel. Keeping the Zoom room open while people work so team members can drop in. That's a great idea, which is a perfect segue for us to turn this over to Susan, who can talk about some of the amazing creative things that technology can do to support us. Thank you all.
Thank you, Linda. Such great points on the communication. And one of the things that I've realized is that, you know, we've all kind of had to ramp up almost overnight in some cases to prepare for what's happening right now, and to actually do the work that we need to do. Technology can really be that double-edged sword. It can offer us a lot of things that we need and that allow us to do our jobs remotely and to stay connected remotely. But that technology also can cut out the human side of what we're all doing, and working with colleagues and being in the same room with people and having face-to-face meetings. And really, as a manager or a leader, that's your responsibility, is to keep everyone engaged. And I think there's good ways you could do that with technology, and there's bad ways you can do that with technology. Linda talked a lot about communication, and I think that is such a key piece here. You really have to have those intentional conversations with your team about how you're staying connected, how you're getting work done. You've got a lot of options these days for technology. I'm going to touch just a little bit on sort of the productivity side of using technology, and then I'll talk a little bit later about more the engagement side of technology. And you know, I think you see the logos here on the screen. We've got a lot of different tools for managing projects, managing our communications, having online meetings, managing the content that we generate and keep in use. One of the things to keep in mind is this, you know, some of these tools may be new for your teams. Maybe you're still in the process of choosing one because you do have so many options. One way that will be a little easier for you is to make up a list of criteria. Because you have so many options, coming up with a list of criteria kind of will knock some of your options off the list right away. It just makes it a little easier to manage that. And also keep in mind that all of your employees, in addition to, you know, dealing with working from home, possibly homeschooling their children, possibly also taking care of elderly parents, and then dealing with their own anxiety about what's happening as well. Give yourself some time to really train people. Let them have a say in the tools that you pick. Get their input on what they think is going to work best for them, what won't work for them, and again, really keep that people element in mind. You may have a couple of false starts. It's going to take a little while for everyone to get comfortable if you're using new project management software for now. So just kind of a couple of things for you to keep in mind as you're looking at the productivity side. You may also want to consider whether or not all of your team members have the right hardware. Do they have, you know, laptops or desktops with enough engine power to really handle being online? Do they have access to high-speed internet connections Do they have a relatively decent webcam if they're going to be doing a lot of online meetings and things like that? They possibly even may be meeting with clients that way. So just keep in mind that you're going to have to look at your resources and look at the technology that you have now and make sure it is going to work for you as you move forward. But looking at the other side of technology, we've also found some really interesting tools that can help you keep your team engaged in really kind of a fun way. And I'm just going to go through a couple of these right now, but there's some really interesting ideas that people are doing right now. If you use Slack for instant messaging, and I'm sure many of you do, there is a cool tool called Donut. And Donut will take and randomly match 2 team members on your team and have them set up and have a 30-minute call. This is a great way for people to get to learn more about each other, whether even if you knew that person in the office, you might have a completely different relationship with them online. So this kind of pairs people up randomly, and really the rule is don't talk about work. So the conversation is really just about you're getting your team members to know each other, the challenges they're going through, the opportunities they're seeing. Petri is another fun tool. This is basically online team facilitation and training. So again, if you're wanting to kind of build that cohesive team and using technology to do that, Petri provides a number of different team facilitation training. They provide the facilitator. You just need to kind of tell them kind of what your goal is and what you're looking for. And they will do all the hard work of setting up the training and walking your team through it. So it's a very facilitated experience. The other 2 I think are really super fun. Tiny Campfire will send all of your teammates all of the fixings for s'mores. So you get marshmallows, you get chocolate, you get the graham crackers, and then the Tiny Campfire team themselves will provide spooky stories and kind of some things that you would do around a campfire. So again, really just a fun way to kind of take some of the stress away and do that team building in a really different way. And then tea versus coffee is very much the same thing. Your team members get sent different samples of tea and coffee ahead of time, and then their team will walk you through some team facilitation and team training activities, all again to kind of build that engagement and sort of keep alive some of the stuff that we are losing from our in-person meetings and conversations. So I would love to hear either what challenges you may be facing right now with technology, or even some of the ways you've used technology to really keep that people engagement going.
Feel free to share any of your best practices if you're seeing anything that you've discovered that is really bringing your team together, helping them get to know each other in different ways like Susan's mentioning, or any big challenges.
All right, well, no questions at the moment, no facts coming in, so I think I will pass this over to Slade, and we'll of course have some opportunities for more questions at the end of the webinar.
Thanks so much, Susan. And you know, this is a really powerful conversation, and I feel like what I'm going to share a little bit accompanies Linda's piece around sort of the expression of remote management in terms of asking powerful questions coming from that coaching mindset and really drawing the best out of your people and understanding the way to work with them. What I want to talk a little bit is to take a step back in terms of where you're coming from as a leader when you have to manage remotely, and some things that you can lean on when you don't have some of the things that leaders like to have, and you know, like a vision direction, benchmarks, where you're going, like sort of a linear structure, Q1, Q2, all those kind of things that many leaders use to drive a conversation and check on metrics and productivity. And that's, of course, those are all very important in business leadership, but what happens when you don't have any of that? When you're in a situation like we are now, where the map has been sort of thrown up in the air and there's more questions than answers, how do you lead remotely? We talked this webinar as remote management, but I also like to think of it like remote leadership. And like Rick alluded to, and Linda, leaders really emerge during times of chaos, during times of war. And because the best made plans really go to waste when you're in a real life situation like we're in. And so what I want to offer is some things that you can lean on, some of which are maybe natural to you, and maybe some you haven't really thought of yet. And I used an acronym for this, CIR, C-I-R, and that's connection, impact, and responsiveness. Because really, as a leader, your job is to move your people from point A to point B, and to understand what they need to hear from you and how you need to connect them emotionally in order to help them keep moving forward. And sometimes the destination B doesn't even exist anymore. On Monday, you had a certain set of goals, and on Tuesday, COVID-19 explodes, and all of a sudden there isn't a clear direction. And so what do you do in that situation? And how do you keep your people connected and keep them moving forward? And so this idea of connection becomes really important. The best leaders know how to connect to their people, and they're able to move them through times of structure, through times of linearity, to times of chaos. And that's what's sort of their signature as a leader. So how do you connect with your people no matter what's going on? But when I say connection, I mean, what do they need to hear from me today? What is the pulse of my team? What are their needs? How am I feeling? What's in the way of me being able to really receive them, relate to them? Maybe my own anxiety. How connected am I to my team? So that's something you always want to pay attention to. It's easy when you're not easy, but easier when you're in an office and you can see somebody in the break room and sort of touch base with them from time to time over the day so they know you're there. But how do you connect with your team when you have limited possibilities for that? And so that just really requires, Linda was talking about asking good questions. It's really asking yourself what's happening inside of them. What are they feeling? What are they needing? And if you have checked in with them throughout the week and you have good one-on-ones and you know what that is, then you can show up to, let's say, a group call and really speak to that. If you haven't, you might need to take the beginning of your call and let's say you come on and you're in your own stuff, your own anxiety, you've been in your own survival, and here you go, you show up for a call at 11 o'clock and you have a bunch of people who need you. What can you do in that moment? How can you get connected? Maybe you haven't had time for a lot of one-on-ones. Well, you can ask the room how they're doing. You can start the call with a 5-minute check-in. Ask each person to offer a word or two about how they're feeling, what's going on for them. And then really listen, as Linda said, not thinking about what you're going to share next, but really listen to what's happening with the individuals on your team until you feel like, okay, this is where they are. This is how I need to meet them today. Maybe they're all coming in with a lot of anxiety and you need to not counter, but you need to honor that and then give them something else to focus on, something else to look forward to, something else to lean into. So really paying attention to how connected you are. And that's something you can actually ask yourself, even halfway through a call, a quarter of the way through the call, be honest and say, are we connected right now? Or am I talking at them? Or am I not understanding them? And one of the things that's really important to do in remote management, my experience, is be willing to stop the status quo and not go through the call if you feel like you're not connected with your team. And that requires a risk to say something. Say, hey guys, it feels like we're not all on the same page here. what's happening with you all, or what do you need right now? And be willing to stop the presses until you can get connected. And it's worth it to do that rather than to motor on with your agenda when you have a bunch of glazed faces looking back at you. You're not really gaining anything. They're going to respect you much more if they feel you feeling the moment and being willing to address what's real. So, I can't overestimate how important connection is in these times, your role as a leader. Next would be your impact, right? So we have connection, the next is impact, and really getting how strong your impact is on your people, especially when they're remote. You may be the only person that they talk to from your company that day. You are the company, you are their job, you are their future, you are their security, and they're watching your facial expression, they're watching your eyes, they're listening to your tone, and you can't underestimate that they're interpreting so much of what's coming from you and making up assessments for themselves about how safe they are, how secure they are. And so then you have to really pay attention to your face. I spoke to someone the other day who said they were presenting something on a group call and their leader, their manager, was scowling the whole time. And when they brought it to him, and luckily they had the courage to bring it, he didn't even realize it. He said, "Oh, I didn't realize I was doing that." So what's your face telling your people? What is your tone telling your people? Are you kind of looking off and checking email while they're talking? And somebody in that group is picking that up. So really thinking about your impact and how that is going to move them, or how that's going to assuage their fear or add to their fear. Realize they're literally watching you. And the last thing I want to offer is responsivity. So there's care, there's impact, and there's responsivity. And really that is, are you addressing their needs? Are you responding to the situation? For example, if someone feels quiet on the call, maybe it's not right to call that out of the moment. Maybe you have a group of 5, 10, 15 people, and one person you notice just isn't sharing. Maybe that's their nature, but it's really up to you to reach out to them for a quick one-on-one afterwards and find out, hey, what was going on today? I noticed normally you're right in the mix with your input, and today you were a little quiet. Those little touch points, because you're not going to run into them in the hallways, right? Those little touch points let them know that you win a huge victory in that way, because they'll get, oh wow, he or she saw me, they noticed. And that's going to make them feel cared for in a whole different way. So that level of responsivity in terms of tracking what's happening in the moment, reaching out, doing those kind of things outside of the box. And then the other thing is responsivity in terms of when you listening to suggestions people have made, things that they've said that they need to make their job feel better, to make them feel more included, to really tracking those and writing those down and giving them the experience that you heard them and doing them. So if you've heard a suggestion from people, oh yeah, I wish we could do X, or I wish there was a little more of this, do it. Go, show them on it periodically that you've heard the things that they need and want, and you've acted on those. Like, Susan had some great suggestions, ways to make them. Maybe they say they feel a little bit disconnected from their teammates. And if you say in the call, wow, we need to do something about that, then really do something about that. You win a huge victory in that if you go and you actually act on what you heard from your team. So, and responsivity is really care and action. It really lets them know that you actually care about them. So what I want to just offer you with this simple tool of connection, of impact, of responsiveness, is to start paying attention to them. You can even write those 3 words down. The next time you're on a one-on-one call or a group call, really ask yourself, write 3 questions. Are we connected? How am I impacting them right now? What do I need to respond to? Okay. And I'll put those in the chat so you can have those. But those are 3 great questions to ask yourself. And the thing is you can be doing those well, no matter what's happening. I've been in situations where one day that we had one CEO and the next day I got on a company call and that CEO was no longer with us. So I had to deal in the moment with chaos, and you can employ these things, connect with your people, feel your impact with them, and respond to their needs. So I'm going to add that. Let's see. Okay, good. And you can use those for your next time you're meeting with your team or people. So thank you all. And with that, I will turn it over to Rick.
Thank you so much, Slade. Appreciate it. So now we're coming down the final stretch, and the last bit I want to talk about is around adaptive leadership. And I wonder if any of you have an amazing remote working station like this woman in the picture here. But this is amazing, right? Where there's times where this is the time where we need to be adaptive. We need to really be paying attention to the moment that's always changing, which is so difficult for all of us. And yet, this is the time where you're actually building your legacy right now as a leader. You're actually building your legacy. You're building what you stand for. Your values are going to be showing up right now in what's most important and where you put your attention on, and how you lead and how you show up for your team or for your customers. Or for other stakeholders that are involved in your daily conversations, or vendors, whoever it might be. So this is actually an exciting time around opportunity. And so let's get into some of the components of how to actually have more adaptive leadership. And one of the key things we're noticing is that there's times to be intuitive and receptive and listening and taking a pause and having some silence on the team meeting, and really pulling out more what's happening in your company environment. And there's also other times to be decisive, where there's not time to waste. You have to actually take an action now. The business still needs to move forward. You still need to move things from A to B, as Slade said earlier, and sometimes you have to actually act on that right away. And so that's one of the most difficult moments right now in being adaptive, is how do you feel into those moments when I need to be intuitive and be more receptive and listening and ask the right questions, and then where I actually need to take action or delegate or put things into motion so that we can stay ahead of the curve in that way. And so one of the key elements, and this is one of my favorite slogans here, is overwhelm, overwhelm, step by step. So that's not a misspelling there. It's how do we actually overwhelm? How do we get bigger than overwhelm? The way to do that is to actually break things down into simple steps. That's the way to reduce our sense of overwhelm. And let's be honest here, everyone on some level is feeling overwhelmed at times. Whether you're leading a big team, a big business unit, whether it's the people in your direct reports, it could be once again your customers who are used to getting your services and things are more delayed or interrupted right now. And so how do you overwhelm? As a manager, one of the best things you can do sometimes right now is actually give your team one thing to focus on. Is one project they need to be focusing on right now. How do you take away some of their uncertainty and actually empower them to get some control right now in what they can actually contribute toward? And giving them just a little bit of control that way actually is such a gift you're giving them, because this is such a time where a lot of us are feeling out of control, or we can't control the bigger situation. What can we control in our department or in our on the project that we're working on together? And so how can you help them get more decisive and focused on the one thing they need to be paying attention to today? What's the one deliverable that you need from them? Or what's the most important deliverable you need in the next 30 days? And that's top of mind. And so how do you reduce that overwhelm to that specificity is sometimes you're going to have to actually just get in there with them and get that fine-tuned and help direct them. And there's a big difference between being directive and micromanaging. And so that's what we're going to get to next year. And Tom had a question in the very beginning of this webinar about, well, how do I know what they're really doing at home when they're remote? And literally, we're hearing this question come up all the time with managers. And the truth is, you don't know what they're doing, and nor can you really control that. And what if this is actually the time to not micromanage? What if this is the time to extend trust? And one of the best ways to do that is to focus on the outcome, not all the activities, not are they working 8 hours or 7.5? Did they, are they taking a break and going outside? And maybe that's actually really productive. Maybe that's actually really helpful if they're going for a walk and getting some fresh air to walk the dog. Maybe that self-care is going to actually enhance your productivity. And so the more that you can focus on the overall outcome and have agreement on that and have clarity of what that is, that's how you can actually relax your own nervous system and also trust that they can actually take on more responsibility. And once again, once you do that, you're empowering them to have more control, have more autonomy. And that's actually going to benefit you because you're not trying to superhero everything yourself and put it all on your shoulders. You're actually creating that servant leadership and allowing them to step up and really contribute. And this is where they get to shine as leaders also. And that's exactly what your team is needing right now. And so another part of that is, how do I manage expectations? How do I get really even more clear than you? If maybe I'm always clear, but how do I get even double down on clarity around the scope of a project, the deadline, the outcomes that we need, the accountabilities, the feedback loops, and communication with my team? How do I manage all the expectations in these different ways? And so that's really one of the keys here. Gallup did a survey, and they found that the number one challenge of management is unclear expectations. That's the number one complaint of managers. Number one is unclear expectations. So that's already the problem. And can you imagine with the uncertainty in the space right now, how that's just going to multiply? So how can you double down on focusing on getting more narrow in certain ways and getting more clear? And then as you're seeing in other ways, how do you get more expansive? How do you get more patient? How do you get more spacious in listening? And that's really the art of adaptive leadership. I have to tune into, what is my team needing from me right now? What is my company needing from me right now? Who's the leader I need to be? And it's not always what I say, but how I say something, my tone of voice, my body language, my energy, my intention, my goodwill. Lastly, how do we be flexible? And so this is also key as we're talking about, we don't know everyone's personal experience right now. We can't assume we know all the stressors that everyone's going through. And so how do we just focus on, maybe we're reimagining what productivity means. Maybe it's not working 8 hours a day anymore. Maybe it's not punching a clock. Maybe productivity can happen in smaller bits and are actually more productive and more focused because they're taking better care of themselves. And that's being encouraged in our culture today. So just feel into, how can you be more flexible and tune into the moment, as well as honoring the objectives that you need to continue to drive for your company. And so this is a really good summary of the different ways that you can learn to be adaptive and turn these challenges into opportunities and really get to start and show the legacy of the leader that you are. And also encourage that in others underneath you. And so I'll leave you with two last questions to think about. One is, where do you need to be more clear and directive and narrow your team's focus? So where do you actually need to do that right now? And you might just even jot that down for yourself. Where are areas to be even more crisp or more directive that way? And then where do you actually need to be more spacious? Where do you need to be more flexible? Where do you need to trust your team to lead a little bit more than you might normally do in this kind of situation? So just see, where do those areas show up in the business right now, where you need to be more focused, and areas where you actually need to be more spacious. And you can always ask for feedback from some of your direct reports, from your colleagues, and just ask, hey, what are you needing from me? How can I remove the roadblocks that are in your way right now so that you can do what you need to do and be successful? Do you have any feedback for me on how I could be even more helpful as a manager for you right now? So that's a great way to check in and just make sure you're getting the sense of being the most productive and helpful that you can be. And then finally, if you want to go deeper in how to actually manage your teams and build some of these skills that we're talking about, we're going to be setting up a follow-up email with this information here. And so some of you got this in our last webinar around leading in times of chaos. So we have a great double vision exercise. So as a manager, what do I need to be reprioritizing right now? And then I also need to have one eye on the future. And so I need to have that double vision. And so we have a great exercise where you can jot down and journal some of the different things you need to be paying attention to in this moment and also down the road. There's also Decisive Intuition, my book that's out there on Amazon. These are all hyperlinked if you want to click onto those. But I can't think of a better time to actually develop our inner resources and our intuitive intelligence so that we can sense the moment and take action and actually be proactive and not reactive. And so Amazon actually has slashed all the pricing of a lot of books right now. I've never seen it cheaper, so go check that out. And also Linda's book that she recommended, and I highly recommend, that she announced earlier around working from home. You know, what are some of the great tips on how do you actually work from home skillfully and effectively? And so that book is coming out this weekend, but bookmark that because you're going to want to grab that as well. We're also offering 50% off on all of our online courses. So just go to intuition-university.com, and we have great courses on building your intuitive intelligence. And if you want to do this with your teams, we've never discounted it 50%. And of course, you see here, COVID50 is the discount code. We also have courses on intuitive sales, intuitive leadership, innovation. Those are some of our advanced tracks to really build your team skills at this time. And lastly, if you want to go deeper in remote coaching and remote training and build resilience and really empower your teams in the ways we're talking about today, find us at info@invisible-edge-llc.com. Happy to have a conversation on how we can tailor this material to your company and to your needs. So thank you all so much for joining us today. I see a lot of questions that came in here. I don't know if we have time to answer these, but happy to continue the conversation and continue the correspondence. But just want to say thank you all so much for being part of our webinar today. Feel free to share, you'll be getting the replay as well. Feel free to share this to anyone who you know that this could serve right now, who may be managing remotely for the first time or just are so feeling the overwhelm of the moment and could use a little more best practices. So thank you all again. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and do stay in touch with your needs, and all the best in pivoting in this moment and tuning into what is your company, what is your team, what are your customers most needing from you right now. Thank you all.